I arrived at my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner with my boyfriend Marcus, expecting to stay in my childhood bedroom like I had every year since moving out. My father Gerald looked up from his newspaper and smirked, pointing toward the tiny storage room near the kitchen that was crammed with old boxes, cleaning supplies, and broken furniture. "Sorry, this room's for family only," he said, with a dismissive wave toward my former bedroom where my brother Trevor and his wife Stephanie were unpacking their designer luggage. My mother Patricia nodded in agreement from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. The humiliation burned through me as Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me, and I suddenly realized this wasn't just about sleeping arrangements at all. Walking into that cramped space felt like stepping into a forgotten corner of someone else's life. The storage room measured barely 6 feet by 8 feet, stuffed floor to ceiling with decades of accumulated junk. Paint cans lined one wall, their tops crusted with dried latex in colors that hadn't been used since the 1990s. Christmas decorations spilled from torn cardboard boxes, tangled strings of lights, creating a hazardous web across the narrow floor space. "There's a perfectly good air mattress somewhere in here," Patricia called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that false cheerfulness she used when she wanted to end uncomfortable conversations quickly. I pushed aside a stack of yellowed photo albums and found the air mattress wedged behind a broken vacuum cleaner. The plastic felt sticky and smelled like it had been stored damp for years. Marcus squeezed in beside me, his 6-foot frame making the space feel even more impossibly small. "Helena, this is ridiculous," he whispered, but I shushed him. I didn't want to cause a scene on our first day here. "Blood family deserves the real bedrooms," Patricia explained matter-of-factly when I emerged with cobwebs in my hair. "Trevor and Stephanie need space for their things. They're planning to start a family soon." The words hit me like cold water. Trevor had married Stephanie only 6 months ago in a courthouse ceremony that cost less than most people spend on dinner. Yet somehow, they warranted the spacious guest room with its comfortable queen bed private bathroom and large windows overlooking the backyard garden. The room that had been mine throughout high school, where I'd studied late into the night to earn the academic scholarships that put me through college without burdening my parents financially. As I dragged the deflated mattress toward the living room to find an air pump, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The hallway walls had always been lined with family photos spanning 3 generations, but now something looked wrong. I stepped closer to examine a picture from my college graduation, and my breath caught in my throat. Someone had carefully scratched out my face with a pen or knife, creating a small tear in the glass. Over the scratched area, a photo of Stephanie had been taped, showing her smiling in what appeared to be my cap and gown. The same alteration had been made to my high school prom picture, my 21st birthday celebration, even the family portrait from last Christmas. "Fee Marcus," I called softly, pointing to the wall. His expression darkened as he took in the systematic erasure of my presence from our family history. "Oh, when did they do this?" he asked, running his finger along the edge of one taped photo. I had no answer. The pictures looked professionally altered, as if someone had spent considerable time and effort to replace me with Stephanie in every significant family memory. The realization that this hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision, but a deliberate, methodical process made my hands shake as I continued searching for the air pump. In the hall closet, I found cardboard boxes marked with my name in my mother's handwriting. Curious, I opened the top one and discovered my childhood belongings thrown carelessly inside. My high school yearbooks sat water damage at the bottom, their pages warped and stuck together. Swimming trophies from my teenage years were tarnished and dented, as if they'd been tossed in without any protective wrapping. A jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother lay broken among old sweaters, its delicate hinges snapped, and the tiny ballerina inside decapitated. These weren't items being carefully preserved for sentimental value. They were things being prepared for disposal. Donate was written across each box in thick black marker. Marcus found me sitting on the closet floor holding the broken jewelry box and trying not to cry. "Hey," he said gently, kneeling beside me. "We don't have to stay here. We can find a hotel." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to understand what was happening to my family and why I suddenly felt like an unwanted stranger in the house where I'd grown up. The storage room that smelled of mildew and mothballs was starting to feel like a metaphor for my new place in this family hierarchy. As we finally located the air pump and began inflating the ancient mattress, I couldn't shake the feeling that this Thanksgiving was going to change everything. The question was whether I'd be strong enough to handle whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up with my back aching from the lumpy air mattress and the scent of old paint cans still lingering in my nostrils. Through the thin storage room door, I could hear the sounds of breakfast preparation and cheerful conversation coming from the kitchen. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine joining that warm scene, sharing coffee and morning laughter with my family like we used to do. That fantasy shattered the moment I stepped into the kitchen doorway. Patricia stood at the stove making pancakes, while chatting animatedly with our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had apparently stopped by to borrow sugar. "Our real daughter, Stephanie, has been such a blessing," Patricia was saying, her voice filled with pride. "She helps with everything around the house, and she's so thoughtful. She even brought me flowers yesterday, just because." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "And what about Helena? Doesn't she visit much anymore?" "Nah, Helena barely visits," Patricia replied with a dismissive shrug as if I weren't standing 10 feet away. "She's always too busy with work or her boyfriend or whatever. Some children just don't understand family responsibility." The words felt like physical blows. I'd driven 5 hours the night before, taking time off from my demanding job as a marketing director to spend Thanksgiving with my family. I visited at least once a month, called every week, and had never missed a major holiday or birthday, yet somehow in my mother's narrative, I was the neglectful daughter. I retreated to the storage room before anyone noticed me, my face burning with embarrassment and hurt. Through the window, I could see Marcus in the backyard talking on his phone and pacing back and forth, probably calling his own family to check in, something I suddenly envied him for being able to do without complication. 20 minutes later, raised voices from the driveway drew my attention back to the window. Trevor was standing beside his black BMW, hands on his hips, looking irritated. "Helena," he shouted toward the house, "move your car, you're blocking my spot." I rushed outside confused. My modest Honda Civic was parked at the far end of the driveway, leaving plenty of room for other vehicles. "I'm not blocking anything," I called back, gesturing to the empty space beside my car. "That's my parking spot," Trevor declared, as if this were obvious. "I always park there when I visit." Since when do we have assigned parking spots?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. Growing up, we'd always parked wherever there was space. "Since I'm married now and need convenient access for loading and unloading," he replied, his tone suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse. "Stephanie has a lot of bags, and she shouldn't have to walk far." I stared at him, trying to process this new family rule that apparently applied only to me. "Trevor, there's literally nowhere else for me to park except the street." "Then park on the street," he said with a shrug. "Problem solved." As I moved my car to the curb, feeling like a visitor who had overstayed their welcome, I noticed Marcus watching from the porch with a concerned expression. He'd witnessed the entire exchange, and I could see the questions forming in his eyes. But the real shock came when I returned inside and passed by my old bedroom. The door was open, and I couldn't help but glance in as I walked by. The space had been completely transformed. Gone were my swimming ribbons, my honor roll certificates, my college acceptance letters that Patricia had once displayed so proudly on the bulletin board. In their place hung Trevor's achievement awards from high school, his baseball trophies, and multiple framed photos of him and Stephanie. My twin bed had been replaced with a king-size mattress, and my childhood desk was now covered with Stephanie's makeup and jewelry. Most disturbing of all, my grandmother's antique jewelry box sat prominently on the dresser, the same jewelry box I'd found broken in the donation pile the night before. Somehow it had been repaired and moved into Trevor's room filled with Stephanie's earrings and necklaces. Helena, there you are. Stephanie appeared in the doorway, wearing one of my old college sweatshirts. I was just telling your mom how we'd love to redecorate this room. Maybe add some built-in shelves, change the paint color. What do you think? I couldn't speak. She was asking for my opinion on redecorating my childhood bedroom while wearing my clothes and using my grandmother's jewelry box. The casual cruelty of it left me speechless. We're thinking a soft gray, she continued, oblivious to my shock. Something sophisticated and grown up. This teenage girl aesthetic really needs to go. Before I could respond, I heard Gerald calling my name from the living room. Helena, come here for a minute. I want to show you something. I found him standing beside the mantelpiece holding my grandmother's antique pearl necklace. The same necklace that had been promised to me since I was 12 years old, a family heirloom passed down through 4 generations of women in our family. I'm giving this to Stephanie, he announced as if presenting her with a grocery store gift card. It belongs to the family now, and she's really part of the family. Stephanie clapped her hands together in delight, rushing forward to accept the necklace. Oh, Gerald, it's beautiful. I can't wait to wear it to our Christmas party. I watched frozen as my grandmother's pearls disappeared around another woman's neck. The necklace that was supposed to be mine, that carried the history of the women who came before me, was now just another accessory for someone who'd married into the family 6 months ago. What about me? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Gerald looked surprised by the question. What about you? Grandma Rose always said the pearls would be mine someday. Well, that was before Stephanie joined the family, Patricia interjected, appearing from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands. She's the one who will be carrying on the family traditions now. She's the one who's going to give us grandchildren. The message was clear. My place in this family was conditional, temporary, and apparently revocable at any time. Meanwhile, Stephanie's position was permanent and privileged, despite having no blood connection to the people who raised me. As I returned to the storage room, my mind reeling from everything I'd witnessed, I realized that this wasn't just favoritism or typical sibling rivalry. This was something much more systematic and deliberate. My parents weren't just preferring Trevor and Stephanie over me. They were actively erasing my history and replacing it with a narrative that didn't include me at all. The question was why, and more importantly, what they planned to do next. After dinner that evening, as I was helping clear dishes, despite not being asked to, Gerald approached me with the casual air of someone about to discuss the weather. The family had gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, the warm glow of table lamps creating an intimate atmosphere that felt increasingly false to me. Helena, sweetheart, I'm glad we have a chance to talk. He began, settling into his favorite recliner with a satisfied sigh. Your mother and I have something important to discuss with you. I paused in stacking plates, immediately alert to the shift in his tone. Patricia emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel, while Trevor and Stephanie looked up from the couch with expressions of anticipation. Clearly, everyone knew what was coming except me. We need you to co-sign our mortgage refinance, Gerald said with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to ask me to pass the salt. It's for $290,000, and we need someone with good credit to help us out. The plates in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Co-sign your mortgage, I repeated, certain I'd misunderstood. Our credit score took a hit after I lost my job 8 months ago, he explained with a dismissive wave, as if this were a minor inconvenience rather than a major financial crisis. Nothing serious, just some missed payments while we figured things out. But you know how picky banks are these days. 8 months. Gerald had been unemployed for 8 months, and this was the first I was hearing about it. I set the plates down carefully, my mind racing with questions. "What job?" I asked. "I thought you were still working at the insurance company." "Oh, that ended last spring," Patricia said breezily. "Downsizing, but don't worry, we've been managing just fine on credit cards and savings." The casual way she mentioned living off credit cards for months made my stomach clench. As a marketing director with a degree in business, I knew exactly how quickly that situation could spiral into financial disaster. "We need someone stable to guarantee the loan," Gerald continued. "Someone with excellent credit and a good income. You're perfect for it." "But it's just a formality," Patricia added quickly, sensing my hesitation. "We'll make all the payments ourselves, of course. We just need your name on the paperwork to satisfy the bank's requirements." I looked around the room, taking in the faces of my family members. Trevor was nodding encouragingly, while Stephanie smiled as if this were the most reasonable request in the world. Only Marcus, who had been quietly observing from the corner, looked concerned. Family helps family," Gerald said with a grandfatherly smile. "That's how we've always done things in this house." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Family helps family, yet I'd been relegated to sleeping in a storage closet and watching my inheritance be given away to strangers. But somehow, when they needed something from me, the rules of family loyalty suddenly applied again. "What's the money for?" I asked, stalling for time while I tried to process this unexpected request. "Well, we want to pay off some debts," Patricia said vaguely, "and we promised Trevor $20,000 to help with the down payment on his house." My head snapped up. "You promised Trevor $20,000. "It's an investment in his future," Gerald explained. "Young couples need help getting started these days. The housing market is so expensive." I stared at them in disbelief. They were asking me to co-sign a nearly $300,000 loan so they could give my brother money for a house while I slept among paint cans and broken Christmas decorations. The audacity of it was breathtaking. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Well, what's to think about?" Trevor interjected, speaking for the first time since Gerald had made his request. "It's not like they're asking you to actually pay for anything. You're just helping them qualify for better terms." "Co-signing a mortgage is a huge responsibility, Trevor," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "If anything goes wrong, I'd be legally responsible for the entire debt." "Nothing's going to go wrong," Stephanie said with a laugh. "Your parents aren't going anywhere. They'll keep making payments just like always." But that wasn't true, was it? If they'd been making payments just like always, they wouldn't need a cosigner. If Gerald hadn't lost his job and missed payments, their credit wouldn't be damaged. If they weren't living off credit cards, they wouldn't need to refinance their house to pay off debt. "We've already talked to the mortgage broker," Patricia said, pulling a folder from the side table. "He's prepared all the paperwork. We can sign everything tomorrow morning and have this wrapped up before the weekend." She handed me the folder with the same casual confidence she'd shown when giving away my grandmother's jewelry. Inside were pre-printed loan documents with my name already filled in as the co-borrower. They'd included my social security number, my employment information, even my current salary. "How did you get all this information about me?" I asked, flipping through pages of financial data I'd never provided. "We still have your tax returns from when you lived here," Gerald said dismissively. "Plus, you've told us about your job and your income. It's not like it's classified information." The casual violation of my privacy was stunning. They'd gathered my personal financial information without my knowledge or consent, used it to apply for a loan, and presented me with a fait accompli. The mortgage broker was expecting me tomorrow morning, the documents were prepared, and everyone assumed I'd simply comply. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "If you need money, why not take out a smaller loan? Why does it have to be a full mortgage refinance?" "Because we need a significant amount," Patricia explained patiently, as if I were being deliberately slow. "The credit card debt alone is over $60,000. plus Trevor's down payment, plus some home improvements we've been planning. $60,000 in credit card debt. The number hit me like a physical blow. My parents, who had always prided themselves on financial responsibility, who had lectured me throughout my childhood about the dangers of debt and overspending, had racked up $60,000 in credit card charges in 8 months. "And you want me to guarantee all of this?" I asked quietly. "Like we said, it's just a formality," Gerald repeated. "We'll handle all the payments. You'll never have to worry about a thing." But as I sat there holding documents that would make me legally responsible for nearly $300,000 of debt, I realized that my parents' definition of family loyalty was very different from mine. They expected me to take on massive financial risk to solve problems they'd created, while simultaneously treating me like an unwelcome guest in their home. The storage room suddenly felt like more than just a place to sleep. It felt like a message about exactly where I stood in this family's priorities. And now I was beginning to understand why they'd been so eager to establish that hierarchy before making their request. That night, I couldn't sleep on the uncomfortable air mattress. The storage room felt suffocating, filled with the musty odors of old cardboard and cleaning chemicals. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those mortgage documents with my name already printed on them, as if my agreement were a foregone conclusion. At 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and quietly opened my laptop. Marcus was breathing steadily beside me, somehow managing to rest, despite our cramped quarters. I logged into my credit monitoring service, something I checked religiously as part of my financial management routine. What I found made my blood run cold. There were 3 credit inquiries from the past 2 weeks, all from mortgage companies I'd never contacted. The first was from Pinnacle Home Lending, dated just 5 days ago. The second was from American Dream Mortgage, dated 3 days ago. The third was from First National Bank, dated yesterday. Someone had been running credit checks on me without my knowledge or permission. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the details. Each inquiry listed my correct social security number, my current address, my employment information. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or clerical error. Someone with access to my personal information had been shopping around for mortgage lenders using my credit profile to get quotes. I grabbed my phone and called the 24-hour customer service line for my credit monitoring company. After navigating through automated menus and security questions, I reached a representative named Janet, who confirmed my worst fears. "Yes, I see the unauthorized inquiries," she said, her voice professional but concerned. "Have you applied for any mortgages recently?" "No," I whispered, glancing toward the door to make sure I wasn't overheard. "I think someone in my family has been using my information without permission." "I'm sorry to hear that. You'll want to file fraud alerts immediately and dispute these inquiries. Do you have any idea who might have access to your social security number and personal details?" I thought about the tax returns Gerald mentioned, the casual way Patricia had included my employment information in their conversations. How many times had I given my parents my address for birthday cards, shared news about promotions or salary increases during family dinners? How many documents had I left behind in my childhood bedroom during visits over the years? My parents, I admitted the words, tasting bitter in my mouth. After filing fraud alerts and disputing the unauthorized credit checks, I spent the next hour researching identity theft laws and co-signer responsibilities. What I learned made me feel sick to my stomach. If I signed those mortgage documents, I wouldn't just be helping my parents qualify for a loan. I would become equally responsible for every payment with no legal right to the property itself. If they defaulted, the bank could come after me for the full amount plus interest and fees. My credit would be destroyed, my assets could be seized, and I could face decades of financial ruin. Worse, co-signing wouldn't just be a favor for my parents. Given their damaged credit and Gerald's unemployment status, I would likely become the primary borrower in the bank's eyes. They would expect me to make payments if my parents couldn't, which seemed increasingly likely given their admission of $60,000 in credit card debt. As dawn broke through the storage room's tiny window, I made a decision. I needed to see those mortgage documents again, but this time I'd know what to look for. I crept into the living room where Patricia had left the folder on the coffee table. In the early morning light, I spread the papers across the kitchen table and began reading carefully. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. The loan application listed me as the primary borrower with Gerald and Patricia as co-borrowers. My income was listed as the primary source of loan qualification. The property would remain in my parents' names, but I would be responsible for payments from day one. If they missed even a single payment, I would be notified and expected to make up the difference immediately. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. As I flipped through supporting documents, I found copies of my tax returns from the past 3 years' bank statements I'd never given them, and even screenshots of my LinkedIn profile showing my job title and company information. They'd been collecting my personal information, systematically building a file that would allow them to apply for credit in my name. The mortgage broker's contact information was already programmed into Gerald's phone. The appointment was scheduled for 10 o'clock this morning. They hadn't just been planning this request. They'd been executing a coordinated strategy to position me as their financial solution. The storage room, the family photos, the pearl necklace, even Trevor's parking space demand suddenly made sense. They'd been establishing a power dynamic that would make it harder for me to refuse when they finally made their move. I photographed every document with my phone, creating my own evidence file. If they were playing games with my financial future, I needed to be prepared to protect myself. As I returned the papers to their folder, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed and holding a cup of coffee. "You're up early," she observed, her eyes noting the mortgage folder in my hands. "Couldn't sleep," I replied truthfully. "Nervous about the signing today?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Don't worry, these things always seem scarier than they really are. Once it's done, you'll feel so much better." The confidence in her voice told me everything I needed to know. In her mind, my signature was already guaranteed. The documents were prepared, the appointment was scheduled, and my compliance was expected. But as I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who was now casually committing fraud with my personal information, I realized that our relationship had fundamentally changed. The person asking for my help wasn't the mother who had protected me throughout my childhood. This was someone willing to risk my financial future to solve problems she'd helped create. The storage room had been more than just a sleeping arrangement. It had been a test, a way to gauge how much disrespect I would tolerate before fighting back. And so far, I'd passed their test by accepting every indignity without complaint. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd shown me their hand before I'd shown them mine. While I was discovering the extent of my parents' financial manipulation, Marcus was making discoveries of his own. He'd stepped outside to take a work call around 9 that morning, but ended up staying on the back patio much longer than necessary when he overheard voices coming from the kitchen window. Gerald and Patricia were having coffee with Trevor and Stephanie, discussing what they clearly thought was a private family matter. But the kitchen window was cracked open to let in the crisp November air, and their voices carried clearly to where Marcus stood near the outdoor furniture. "What if Helena gets difficult about signing?" Stephanie asked, her voice lacking the sweet tone she used when I was around. "She seemed pretty hesitant last night." "She'll sign," Gerald replied confidently. "Helena's always been desperate to please us. She hates conflict more than anything." "But what if she doesn't?" Trevor pressed. "What's our backup plan?" Patricia's laugh was cold and calculating. "Oh, we have plenty of ways to motivate Helena. She's terrified of being cut off from the family. Threaten to exclude her from Christmas and she'll fold immediately. Marcus told me later that hearing my mother's casual cruelty felt like being punched in the stomach. He'd spent enough time with our family to see how much I valued these relationships, how hard I worked to maintain connections with people who apparently saw my love as a weakness to exploit. We could tell everyone she refused to help us in our time of need, Gerald added thoughtfully. Let the whole family know she chose money over family loyalty. Helena cares too much about her reputation to let that happen. That's brilliant, Stephanie chimed in enthusiastically. Make it a public shame thing. Force her to choose between her precious family image and her bank account. What about Emily? Trevor asked, referring to our younger sister who lived in London. Could we get her to pressure Helena? Already tried that, Patricia admitted. Called Emily yesterday and told her Helena was being selfish about helping us. Emily said she'd talk to her, but honestly, Emily's too far away to be much help. Marcus's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and started recording. He'd initially meant to document just a few seconds for evidence, but their conversation was so shocking that he kept the recording running for nearly 10 minutes. The best part is that Helena has no idea how bad our finances really are, Gerald continued with obvious satisfaction. She thinks this is just about the credit card debt and Trevor's down payment. If she knew we haven't made a mortgage payment in 4 months, she'd run screaming. 4 months. They hadn't made their mortgage payment in 4 months, meaning they were already in serious default. Co-signing their refinance wouldn't just be helping them get better terms, it would be saving them from imminent foreclosure. And they hadn't told me any of this. How much do we actually owe? Stephanie asked. Yes, between the credit cards, the mortgage arrears, the home equity line we maxed out last year, and the personal loans from Gerald's brother, we're looking at about $400,000 in total debt, Patricia said matter-of-factly. But Helena doesn't need to know all that. The refinance will cover everything and give us a fresh start. Marcus told me his phone nearly slipped from his hands. $400,000. They weren't asking me to co-sign a simple mortgage refinance. They were asking me to guarantee nearly $500,000 in debt that they'd accumulated through financial mismanagement and deception. What if she finds out? Trevor asked nervously. How would she find out? Gerald scoffed. Helena's never been smart about money. She thinks good credit means you pay your bills on time. She has no idea how to research property records or check liens. By the time she figures out what we really owe, the refinance will be done and it'll be too late. Plus, once she's on the hook for the mortgage, she'll have to help us make payments, Patricia added with a vindictive edge to her voice. She won't have any choice. If we default, her credit gets destroyed too. It's perfect leverage. The recording captured Stephanie's delighted giggle at this revelation. So we're not just getting her to co-sign, we're basically making her our permanent financial backup plan. That's genius. Helena's always acted like she's better than us with her fancy job and her college education, Gerald said bitterly. Time for her to put her money where her mouth is and prove how much she really loves this family. Marcus had heard enough. He ended the recording and quietly moved away from the window, his mind reeling from what he'd discovered. These weren't loving parents asking for help in a temporary crisis. These were people planning to deliberately trap me in a financial nightmare that could destroy my future. But their conversation wasn't over. As Marcus was preparing to come inside and warn me, he heard Patricia mention my name again. Did you see Helena's face when we gave Stephanie the pearls? She asked with obvious amusement. I thought she might actually cry right there in the living room. But that was the whole point, Gerald replied. We need her feeling insecure about her place in this family. The more uncertain she feels, the more desperate she'll be to prove her loyalty by signing those papers. Brilliant psychology, Trevor agreed. Make her sleep in the storage room, give away her inheritance. Replace her in all the family photos. By the time we ask for the mortgage signature, she'll be so eager to get back in our good graces that she'll agree to anything. It's working perfectly, Stephanie added. She's been trying so hard to be pleasant and accommodating since yesterday. I bet if we asked her to clean the house top to bottom, she'd do it just to try to earn our approval. Marcus later told me that hearing them discuss the systematic psychological manipulation of someone he loved made him physically ill. They'd orchestrated every detail of my humiliation, from the sleeping arrangements to the photo alterations, as part of a calculated campaign to make me vulnerable to their financial demands. "What about Marcus?" Patricia asked suddenly. "He seems pretty protective of Helena. Could he cause problems?" "Marcus is nobody," Gerald dismissed. "He's not family. If he gets in the way, we'll just make it clear that his opinions don't matter here. Helena will choose us over him if she has to." "We should probably separate them before the signing," Trevor suggested. "Send Marcus on some errands so Helena has to face this alone. She's much easier to manipulate when she doesn't have backup." Good thinking," Patricia agreed. "I'll ask him to run to the store for something we forgot for dinner. That'll get him out of the house for at least an hour." As Marcus stood outside, listening to my family plan my financial destruction, with the same casual attention they might give to planning a dinner menu, he realized he was witnessing something truly evil. These weren't people who loved me making a difficult request. These were predators who had identified me as their ideal victim. He needed to get back inside and warn me immediately, but as he reached for the door handle, he heard one final exchange that made him pause. "What if someone finds out what we've done?" Stephanie asked quietly. "The credit checks using her information without permission. Isn't that illegal?" "Only if Helena reports it," Gerald replied confidently. "And she won't. Helena would never do anything to hurt her family even after learning what we've done. That's her weakness, and it's exactly what's going to save us." Marcus realized they were counting on my love for them as insurance against the consequences of their crimes. They believed I cared too much about family harmony to pursue legal action, even if I discovered their fraud. In their minds, my devotion to them made me the perfect victim. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They didn't account for the fact that someone outside their family circle would be listening, someone who had no emotional attachment to protect them from the consequences of their actions. As Marcus finally came inside his phone heavy with recorded evidence of their conspiracy, he knew everything was about to change. The question was whether I'd be strong enough to handle the truth about the people I'd spent my entire life trying to please. At 11:30 that morning, my phone rang with an international number I recognized immediately. Emily was calling from London, which was unusual since she typically texted first to check if I was available to talk. The 6-hour time difference meant it was already early evening for her. "Helena, thank God you answered." Emily's voice was breathless and panicked. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday, but I wasn't sure if you were still at Mom and Dad's house." "I'm here," I confirmed, stepping outside onto the back patio for privacy. "What's wrong? You sound upset." "I am upset," she replied, her voice shaking. "Dad called me 3 days ago, demanding that I pressure you about some mortgage thing. He said you were being selfish and stubborn about helping the family, and that I needed to convince you to do the right thing." My stomach dropped. "What exactly did he tell you?" "He said they needed you to co-sign a loan because their credit had some temporary problems and that you were refusing out of spite. He made it sound like you were abandoning them in their hour of need." I sat down heavily on the patio furniture. "Emily, I only found out about this mortgage yesterday. I haven't refused anything yet." "What?" Her voice rose in confusion. "But Dad said you'd already said no multiple times. He was furious about it." "That's not true," I said slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. "They just asked me yesterday evening. I said I needed to think about it." There was a long silence on Emily's end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was much quieter. "Helena, I think they've been lying to both of us." "What do you mean?" "Dad told me this was a small loan to help them through a rough patch. He said it was only for $20,000 and that you were being unreasonable because you didn't want to risk your precious credit score." $20,000. They'd told Emily the loan was for $20,000 while telling me it was for $290,000. The discrepancy was so massive, it couldn't be a simple miscommunication. Emily, they're asking me to co-sign for nearly $300,000, I said quietly. 300,000, she gasped. Helena, that's not what Dad told me at all. He said it was just a small personal loan to cover some medical expenses and car repairs. As we compared notes, a horrifying picture emerged. Our parents had been telling each of us completely different stories about their financial situation, manipulating us both with customized lies designed to exploit our individual weaknesses and circumstances. There's something else, Emily said hesitantly. Dad didn't just ask me to talk to you, he asked me to send them money. How much money? $12,000 over the past 6 months. She admitted, her voice heavy with shame. They said it was temporary, just to help cover expenses while Dad looked for a new job. They promised to pay me back as soon as they got their finances straightened out. $12,000. Emily was a graduate student in London, living on a modest stipend while pursuing her PhD in international relations. $12,000 represented months of her careful savings money she needed for her own education and living expenses. Emily, you can't afford to give them $12,000, I said, horrified. I know that now, she replied miserably, but they made it sound like an emergency. Mom called crying, saying they might lose the house if I didn't help. She said you and Trevor were both contributing, and that I was the only one who could prevent them from becoming homeless. Another lie. I hadn't been contributing anything, and given Trevor's request for $20,000 from their refinance, he clearly wasn't helping financially either. Our parents had created a fictional narrative where all their children were pooling resources to help the family, when in reality, they were systematically exploiting each of us individually. Dad told me not to mention the money to you, Emily continued. He said it would hurt your feelings to know that your little sister was more financially generous than you were. The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. They'd convinced Emily that I was being selfish while simultaneously hiding her sacrifices from me, preventing us from comparing notes and discovering their deception. What else did Dad say when he called? I asked. He said that if I didn't convince you to sign the mortgage papers, it would prove that neither of us really loved our family. He said Mom was so hurt by your attitude that she was considering cutting you out of family events permanently. The threat was familiar. Marcus had overheard them discussing using emotional manipulation and exclusion to force my compliance. But hearing that, they'd extended their tactics to include my sister, who lived 3,000 miles away and was struggling financially as a graduate student, made their cruelty even more staggering. Emily, there's something you need to know, I said carefully. I think Mom and Dad have been lying about more than just the loan amount. I told her about the storage room, the altered family photos, the pearl necklace, and everything I discovered about their true financial situation. As I spoke, Emily's sharp intakes of breath told me she was beginning to understand the scope of our parents' deception. They've been planning this for months, she said, finally her voice hollow with realization. The money they asked me for the stories about emergencies, the pressure to contact you, this was all part of some bigger scheme. I think so, I agreed, and I think we're not the only ones being manipulated. Helena, I can't get my money back, can I? Emily asked quietly. The $12,000 I sent them, it's just gone. The pain in her voice broke my heart. Emily had sacrificed her own financial security to help people who were systematically lying to her, and now she was beginning to realize that her trust had been weaponized against her. I don't know, I admitted, but Emily, you need to stop sending them money immediately. Promise me you won't give them another penny no matter what they say. I promise, she said firmly, but Helena, I'm scared for you. If they're willing to lie to both of us and steal money from me, what are they planning to do to you? It was a question I'd been trying not to think about, but Emily's $12,000 loss proved that our parents were willing to cause real financial harm to their own children to solve their problems. The mortgage co-signing wasn't just a favor they were requesting. It was a trap they were setting. "Emily, I need you to do something for me," I said. "If anything happens to me, if I suddenly stop returning your calls, or if mom and dad tell you I've decided to cut contact with the family, I need you to know it's not true. They're going to try to isolate me and control the narrative." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to refuse to sign their mortgage." I replied, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words aloud. "And I think that's going to change everything." "Helena, be careful," Emily warned. "If they're desperate enough to steal from both of us, there's no telling what they'll do when you threaten their plan." After ending the call with Emily, I sat on the patio staring at my phone. My sister's revelations had transformed my understanding of the situation completely. This wasn't a family asking for help. This was a criminal enterprise that happened to share my DNA. But knowing the truth and acting on it were two very different things. In a few hours, my parents would expect me to accompany them to the mortgage broker's office and sign documents that would destroy my financial future. The question was whether I had the strength to disappoint people I'd spent my entire life trying to please, even after learning they'd been systematically betraying my trust for months. After my conversation with Emily, I felt like I was seeing my family's behavior through completely new eyes. Every interaction, every casual comment, every seemingly innocent request now carried the potential for hidden manipulation. I needed more information before the mortgage appointment, and I suspected the evidence was somewhere in this house. I waited until everyone was busy with lunch preparations before conducting my investigation. Patricia was in the kitchen making sandwiches, while Gerald, Trevor, and Stephanie were in the living room watching football. Marcus was helping with lunch, but I caught his eye and nodded toward the hallway. He understood immediately. Gerald's home office was located in a converted bedroom at the end of the hall. He'd always been protective of this space, claiming it contained sensitive insurance documents that required privacy. Now I wondered what else might be hidden there. The door was unlocked, and I slipped inside while Marcus kept watch from the hallway. Gerald's desk was covered with papers, folders, and several legal pads covered with handwriting. What I found there made my hands shake with rage. On the top legal pad, Gerald had been practicing my signature. Page after page showed variations of Helena Morrison, written in Gerald's handwriting, each attempt getting closer to my actual signature style. He'd been studying my signature from old birthday cards and thank you notes, learning to replicate the specific way I formed letters and connected them together. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. Underneath the legal pad, I found copies of mortgage documents that had been altered with whiteout and careful forgery. Gerald had been experimenting with different ways to modify the loan terms after the papers were signed, practicing techniques for changing numbers and conditions without detection. A folder marked Helena Financial contained copies of documents I'd never given him permission to possess. My tax returns from the past 3 years, bank statements I'd never shared with anyone, copies of my credit reports, even screenshots of my LinkedIn profile and Facebook posts mentioning work achievements or salary information. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Helena, someone's coming," he whispered urgently. I grabbed my phone and quickly photographed as many documents as possible, my hands trembling as I tried to capture clear images of Gerald's signature practice and the stolen financial records. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to get out before being caught. We made it back to the storage room just as Gerald's footsteps echoed down the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain everyone in the house could hear it. "What did you find?" Marcus whispered once we were safely behind the closed door. I showed him the photos on my phone, watching his expression grow darker with each image. The signature practice sheets were particularly damning, clear evidence of premeditation and intent to commit fraud. "Helena, "This is criminal," Marcus said quietly. "Your father is planning to forge your signature if you refuse to sign voluntarily." "I know," I replied, my voice shaking. "But there's more?" I pulled up the images of my stolen financial records, pointing out dates and details that proved Gerald had been collecting my personal information for months. Bank statements, credit reports, tax returns, employment records. He'd assembled a complete financial profile that would allow him to impersonate me for almost any purpose. "How did he get all this?" Marcus asked. "Some of it he stole during my visits here," I explained, thinking back to times I'd left my purse unattended or paperwork visible in my bedroom. "But some of it he must have obtained through fraud. These credit reports are recent. He would have needed my social security number and personal details to request them." Marcus was studying the photos intently. "Helena, look at this folder tab." I squinted at the image. The folder containing my financial information was labeled Helena Financial, but there was another folder partially visible underneath it, labeled Emily International. "He has a file on Emily too," Marcus realized. The implications were staggering. Gerald hadn't just been targeting me. He'd been systematically collecting financial information on both his daughters, creating the infrastructure for large-scale identity theft and financial fraud. Before I could fully process this revelation, we heard Patricia calling my name from the kitchen. "Helena, can you come help with lunch?" I forced myself to walk normally down the hallway, trying to appear calm while my mind raced with everything I'd discovered. Patricia was arranging sandwiches on a platter, humming cheerfully, as if she hadn't just been plotting my financial destruction. "The mortgage appointment is in 3 hours," she mentioned casually as I helped carry food to the dining room. "I'm so excited to get this paperwork finalized. It's such a relief to have everything sorted out." Her confident tone made it clear that she still considered my signature a foregone conclusion. In her mind, the morning's preparation had been just administrative details before my inevitable compliance. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," I replied, carefully testing her reaction. "Oh." Patricia's voice remained cheerful, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. "About family helping family," I continued. "It got me wondering about other family members. Has Emily been helping out too?" Patricia's pause was so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching carefully. "Emily's a student, dear. She can't really contribute much from London." The lie came so smoothly that I realized Patricia had probably rehearsed responses to questions about Emily's involvement. She was prepared for me to ask about my sister, which suggested they'd discussed how to handle that conversation. "But she could at least offer moral support," I pressed. "Has she said anything about the mortgage situation?" "Emily supports whatever's best for the family," Patricia replied vaguely, turning back to the sandwiches. "She understands family loyalty." As we carried lunch to the dining room, I noticed Gerald watching me intently from his position at the head of the table. His expression was pleasant enough, but his eyes held a calculating quality that made me uncomfortable. "Helena looks tired," he observed as everyone sat down. "I hope you're getting enough rest in the storage room." The comment felt like a test, a reminder of my diminished status in the family hierarchy. Gerald was checking to see if I'd internalized the message that my comfort and dignity were less important than Trevor and Stephanie's convenience. "I'm fine," I replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. Good," Gerald smiled, "because we'll need you sharp for the appointment this afternoon. Mortgage paperwork can be complex, and we want to make sure you understand everything you're signing." The irony was breathtaking. The man who had been practicing forging my signature was now expressing concern about my comprehension of legal documents. Gerald was playing his role perfectly, maintaining the facade of a caring father while secretly planning to commit fraud if his manipulation failed. As lunch continued, I found myself studying each family member with new awareness. Patricia's cheerful chatter about holiday plans, Trevor's casual mentions of his house hunting progress, Stephanie's grateful comments about family generosity. All of it felt performative now, designed to reinforce the narrative that I was surrounded by people who deserved my sacrifice. But the most unsettling realization was how normal this all seemed from the outside. If Marcus hadn't overheard their private conversations, if I hadn't discovered Gerald's forged documents, if Emily hadn't called with her warnings, I might have walked into that mortgage office completely unprepared for what was really happening. The storage room, the altered photos, the pearl necklace, even this lunch conversation were all part of an elaborate psychological operation designed to make me compliant and vulnerable. And it had nearly worked. The question now was whether I had the courage to fight back against people who had spent months planning my destruction, knowing that resistance would destroy what remained of my relationship with my family forever. As the extended family began arriving for Thanksgiving dinner, I realized that Gerald and Patricia had planned something much more elaborate than a simple family meal. Cars filled the driveway and lined the street as aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends streamed into the house carrying covered dishes and warm greetings. Uncle Robert arrived first with his wife Carol, followed by Patricia's sister Margaret and her husband Bill. Gerald's brother James came with his family, and soon the house was filled with the cheerful chaos of a large family gathering. What should have been a joyous occasion felt increasingly ominous as I watched Gerald and Patricia play the role of gracious hosts. During the cocktail hour, as everyone mingled in the living room sharing updates and catching up on family news, Gerald clinked his wineglass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. Before we sit down to dinner, I have some wonderful news to share. He announced, his voice carrying the warm authority of a beloved patriarch. Our daughter Helena has generously agreed to help Patricia and me with some financial planning. I felt the blood drain from my face as every eye in the room turned toward me. This wasn't happening. Gerald couldn't possibly be about to announce my agreement to co-sign their mortgage in front of the entire extended family. Helena has offered to co-sign our mortgage refinance. Gerald continued with obvious pride, which will allow us to pay off some debts and help Trevor and Stephanie get started in their new life together. The room erupted in approving murmurs and warm applause. Uncle Robert nodded appreciatively while Aunt Margaret beamed with pride. Several cousins raised their wine glasses in my direction, clearly impressed by what they perceived as my financial generosity. "That's wonderful, Helena," Aunt Carol said warmly. "It's so rare to see young people who really understand family responsibility." I sat frozen in my chair, unable to speak or move. Gerald had just publicly committed me to a decision I hadn't made, creating social pressure that would be almost impossible to resist without causing a humiliating scene in front of people I'd known my entire life. Helena insisted on helping," Patricia added with theatrical emotion, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "She said family comes before everything else and that she couldn't bear to see us struggle when she has the ability to help." More approving nods and murmurs filled the room. I could see the genuine affection and respect in my relatives' eyes as they looked at me, proud to be related to someone who would make such a significant sacrifice for her parents. "Let's have a toast," Gerald declared, raising his wine glass high. "To Helena for showing us what family loyalty really means." To Helena, the room chorused, 20 voices speaking in unison as glasses were raised in my honor. I mechanically lifted my own glass, my hand shaking slightly as I tried to process what had just happened. Gerald had trapped me in a web of public expectation and social obligation, making it nearly impossible to refuse the mortgage without looking like a selfish daughter who had broken a promise to help her struggling parents. As dinner was served and conversation flowed around the table, family members kept making references to my supposed generosity. Cousin David thanked me for setting a good example for his own children about family values. Aunt Margaret shared a story about her own parents helping her buy her first house, drawing parallels to my situation. The most painful moment came when Uncle James Gerald's younger brother pulled me aside during dessert to offer his private thanks. Your father called me last week, so worried about their finances, he said quietly, his hand resting paternally on my shoulder. He was too proud to ask for help directly, but I could hear the stress in his voice. What you're doing for them, Helena, it's going to save their retirement. They'll never forget this kindness. Uncle James was a man I'd respected my entire life, someone whose opinion mattered deeply to me. Hearing him speak about my parents' supposed financial distress with such genuine concern made me realize how thoroughly Gerald and Patricia had manipulated the entire family's perception of the situation. They'd created a narrative where they were struggling victims deserving of sympathy and support, while I was the successful daughter with the ability to solve their problems through a simple signature. No one knew about the $400,000 in debt, the months of missed mortgage payments, or the systematic identity theft that had preceded this request. "I'm just glad I can help," I managed to say the words, feeling like ash in my mouth. As the evening progressed, Trevor stood to make his own announcement. "Since we're sharing good news, Stephanie and I want everyone to know that we've found the perfect house. Thanks to Mom and Dad's help with the down payment, we'll be closing next month." More applause and congratulations filled the room. Stephanie glowed with happiness as relatives asked about their new home, clearly enjoying her role as a favored daughter-in-law who was being welcomed into the family with such generous financial support. The irony was devastating. Trevor and Stephanie were being celebrated for receiving $20,000 from the mortgage refinance, while I was being praised for risking nearly $300,000 to make their gift possible. Yet somehow, in the family's eyes, we were both equally generous participants in this arrangement. During coffee and pie, Patricia made a point of loudly discussing our departure plans for the mortgage appointment. "We need to leave by 9 tomorrow morning," she announced to the table. "The broker is fitting us in on the day after Thanksgiving as a special favor." "How convenient," Aunt Margaret replied approvingly, "getting all the paperwork signed while Helena's in town for the holiday. Very efficient planning." Gerald nodded sagely. "We wanted to handle this while the whole family could be together. It makes it more meaningful when everyone witnesses Helena's commitment to helping us." The word "witnesses" sent a chill down my spine. Gerald wasn't just creating social pressure, he was creating social witnesses to my supposed agreement. If I backed out now, 20 people would know that I'd broken my word about helping my struggling parents. As relatives began departing, each one stopped to thank me personally for my generosity. The cumulative weight of their gratitude and approval felt crushing. These were people who had watched me grow up, who had celebrated my achievements, and supported me through difficult times. The thought of disappointing them all felt almost unbearable. But as I hugged Uncle Robert goodbye, he whispered something that made me freeze. "Helena, I hope you've been careful about the legal details. Mortgage co-signing can be tricky business." "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "Just make sure you understand exactly what you're signing," he replied, his retired police officer's instincts evident in his tone. "I've seen families torn apart by financial arrangements that went bad." Uncle Robert's subtle warning reminded me that beneath all the social pressure and family expectations, the cold reality of the mortgage documents remained unchanged. No amount of public approval would protect me if Gerald and Patricia defaulted on nearly $300,000 in debt. As the house finally emptied and the family settled in for the evening, I realized that Gerald's public announcement had been a masterstroke of manipulation. He'd transformed a private financial arrangement into a public family commitment, making the social cost of refusal almost as devastating as the financial cost of compliance. But he'd also made a critical mistake. By announcing my agreement before actually obtaining my signature, he'd created a scenario where my refusal would be equally public and dramatic. If I was going to disappoint my family, at least everyone would witness exactly what had happened. The question was whether I had the strength to choose my financial future over my family's approval, knowing that either choice would change my life forever. That night, as the house finally settled into quiet after the chaos of Thanksgiving dinner, I lay awake on the deflated air mattress, staring at the ceiling. The events of the evening had crystallized everything for me. This wasn't just about a mortgage anymore. This was about the fundamental nature of my relationship with my family and my own sense of self-worth. At midnight, I carefully extracted myself from the storage room and made my way to the kitchen to call my lawyer friend David. We'd met in college and had maintained a close friendship even after he'd moved to Chicago for law school. David specialized in financial law and had helped me review contracts for previous jobs. "No, Helena," David's voice was groggy but alert. "Is everything okay? It's pretty late." "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need legal advice urgently," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm in a situation involving mortgage fraud and identity theft, and I need to know what my options are." David was immediately awake. "Start from the beginning and tell me everything." For the next hour, I walked David through the entire situation, from the storage room, humiliation, to Gerald's forged signature practice, from Emily's $12,000 loss to the public mortgage announcement at dinner. David asked detailed questions about the timeline, the amounts involved, and the evidence I'd gathered. "Helena, this is serious criminal fraud," David said finally, his professional tone sobering. "What your parents are doing could result in federal charges. Identity theft, mortgage, fraud, forgery. We're looking at potential felony convictions." "But what about my liability if I sign?" I asked, focusing on the immediate threat. "If you co-sign that mortgage, you become legally responsible for the entire debt from day one," David explained. "Given what you've told me about your parents' hidden debts and payment history, I'd estimate there's about an 80% chance you'll end up making payments within the first year." The number hit me like a physical blow. 80%. David wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was giving me a professional assessment based on similar cases he'd handled. "What's worse," he continued, "is that you'd have no legal claim to the property. Your parents would own the house, but you'd be responsible for the mortgage. If they default completely, you could end up paying for a house you can't live in and can't sell." "What should I do?" I asked. "Zaim, first, don't sign anything under any circumstances. Second, document everything you've discovered and file fraud reports with the credit agencies and police. Third, consider getting a restraining order to prevent them from using your personal information for future fraud attempts." David's advice was clear and logical, but implementing it would mean destroying my relationship with my family completely. There would be no going back from filing criminal charges against my parents. "David, what if I just refuse to sign but don't pursue legal action?" I asked. "What if I try to handle this quietly?" "Helena, they've already committed serious crimes using your identity. If you don't report this, you're giving them implicit permission to continue. They could apply for credit cards, personal loans, even mortgages in your name. You need to protect yourself legally." After ending the call with David, I spent the rest of the night researching my parents' property records and financial history online. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears. The house that Gerald and Patricia claimed was their secure family home was actually heavily leveraged. They'd taken out a home equity line of credit for $150,000 2 years ago. They'd refinanced their original mortgage twice in 5 years, each time borrowing more money. Property tax records showed they were 6 months behind on payments. Most shocking of all, I found records of legal judgments against Gerald from creditors. He'd been sued successfully 3 times in the past 2 years for defaulting on personal loans and credit card debt. His wages had been garnished, and liens had been placed against the house. My parents weren't just asking me to co-sign a mortgage. They were asking me to assume responsibility for a financial disaster that had been building for years. The house was already at risk of foreclosure, and the refinance was their last desperate attempt to avoid losing everything. But the most disturbing discovery was a pre-foreclosure notice filed just 2 weeks ago. Gerald and Patricia had been officially notified that they had 60 days to bring their mortgage current or face foreclosure proceedings. The mortgage appointment wasn't about refinancing for better terms, it was about preventing imminent homelessness. As dawn broke through the storage room's tiny window, Marcus stirred beside me. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked quietly. "No," I admitted, "but I know what I have to do now." I showed Marcus my phone explaining what David had told me and sharing the property records I discovered. His expression grew more concerned with each revelation. "Helena, you realize they're not going to take no for an answer," Marcus said finally. "When you refuse to sign, they're going to get desperate. Desperate people do unpredictable things." He was right. Gerald and Patricia had spent months planning this scheme, had involved extended family in their manipulation, and were facing imminent foreclosure. My refusal wouldn't just disappoint them, it would destroy their only remaining plan for financial survival. "I need evidence," I said, formulating a strategy. "If I'm going to accuse them of fraud and refuse their request publicly, I need to be able to prove everything I'm saying." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me the recordings he'd made of their private conversations. I have some of that evidence already. Together, we spent the early morning hours creating comprehensive documentation packages. Marcus transferred his audio recordings to a secure cloud storage account while I organized my photographs of Gerald's forged documents and stolen financial records. We compiled a timeline of events, a summary of the fraudulent credit inquiries, and copies of the property records showing their true financial situation. David had given me the names of 3 contact people: a fraud investigator at my bank, a detective at the local police department who specialized in identity theft cases, and an attorney who handled financial fraud litigation. I prepared separate evidence packages for each of them. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked as we finished our preparations. I thought about the question seriously. Was I ready to destroy my relationship with my parents, disappoint my extended family, and face potential retaliation from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to commit serious crimes? Was I ready to choose my financial security over family harmony, knowing that decision would define the rest of my life? "No," I admitted honestly, "but I'm more ready to do this than I am to spend the next 30 years paying off their debts." The mortgage appointment was scheduled for 10 o'clock, just 4 hours away. In less than half a day, I would either sign away my financial future or declare war on my family. There was no middle ground left, no compromise that would satisfy everyone. But for the first time since arriving at my parents' house, I felt like I had some control over the situation. I had evidence, I had legal advice, I had a support system, and I had a plan. Gerald and Patricia had been counting on my ignorance and emotional vulnerability to ensure my compliance. They were about to discover that their carefully constructed manipulation had backfired completely. The next morning, while my family prepared for what they believed would be a routine trip to the mortgage broker, I was implementing the most important mission of my life. I had a narrow window of opportunity while everyone was distracted with breakfast and getting ready for our 10 o'clock appointment. Patricia was in the shower, Gerald was shaving, and Trevor and Stephanie were packing their bags for their departure later that day. Marcus had volunteered to help with breakfast cleanup, positioning himself as a lookout while I gathered the evidence that would protect my future. I returned to Gerald's home office with a small portable scanner that Marcus had retrieved from my car. My hands were steadier now than they'd been the day before. Having a clear plan and legal support had transformed my nervous energy into focused determination. Working quickly but methodically, I scanned every document in Gerald's Helena Financial folder. The stolen tax returns, the unauthorized credit reports, the bank statements I'd never provided. Each scan was timestamped and automatically uploaded to my secure cloud storage account. The signature practice sheets were even more damning in daylight. Gerald had filled 4 legal pads with attempts to replicate my handwriting, progressing from crude forgeries to sophisticated reproductions that could easily fool a casual observer. He'd studied the pressure patterns of my pen strokes, the specific angles of my letter formations, even the way I dotted my I's and crossed my T's. But the most shocking discovery was a folder I hadn't noticed during my previous search. Hidden behind the financial documents was a file labeled Backup Plans that contained research into my personal life that went far beyond financial information. Gerald had printed emails between Marcus and me discussing our relationship timeline and future plans. He'd saved screenshots of my social media posts mentioning work stress, family obligations, and personal insecurities. Most disturbing of all, he'd compiled a psychological profile analyzing my personality traits and emotional vulnerabilities. One handwritten note in Gerald's scrawl read, "Helena's primary weakness is fear of family rejection. Secondary weakness is guilt over educational advantages. Use both if mortgage plan fails." Another note detailed backup manipulation strategies. If Helena refuses mortgage, remind her of college tuition payments. Emphasize sacrifice Patricia made quitting job during Helena's senior year. Make her feel responsible for parents' financial stress. They'd been studying me like a laboratory specimen, identifying psychological pressure points they could exploit if their primary plan encountered resistance. The clinical coldness of their analysis was more hurtful than any of their financial crimes. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Helena, Gerald's looking for you. I think he's getting suspicious about why you're not getting ready." I quickly scanned the psychological profiles and returned the folders to their original positions. As we left the office, I heard Gerald calling my name from the kitchen. "Helena, we need to leave in 30 minutes. Have you gathered all your identification documents?" "Almost ready," I called back, forcing my voice to sound normal and cooperative. In the storage room, I pulled out my phone and began implementing the next phase of my plan. David had given me the contact information for Detective Sarah Martinez, who specialized in financial fraud cases for the County Sheriff's Department. "Detective Martinez, this is Helena Morrison. I need to report ongoing mortgage fraud and identity theft," I said when she answered. "Are you in immediate danger?" she asked professionally. "Not physical danger, but I'm being pressured to sign fraudulent mortgage documents in about 2 hours. I have extensive evidence of the fraud, including forged signatures and stolen financial records." Detective Martinez's tone sharpened with interest. "Can you come to the station immediately?" "I'm supposed to be at a mortgage appointment with the perpetrators. If I disappear now, they'll know something's wrong." "Then we need to document everything you have right now over the phone and set up a plan for you to safely extract yourself from the situation." For the next 15 minutes, I provided Detective Martinez with a detailed account of everything I discovered while she recorded our conversation and created an official incident report. She asked me to email her the evidence files immediately and gave me a case number for reference. "Ms. Morrison, what you're describing constitutes serious felony fraud," Detective Martinez confirmed. "We'll need you to come in for a formal statement, but based on what you've told me, we have probable cause for investigation." "What should I do about the mortgage appointment?" "Do not sign anything under any circumstances. If they pressure you or threaten, you call me immediately. We can have officers at the mortgage broker's office within minutes if necessary." After ending the call with Detective Martinez, I contacted Jennifer Walsh, the fraud investigator at my bank that David had recommended. Jennifer was equally concerned about the unauthorized credit inquiries and the potential for additional fraudulent accounts. "I'm placing immediate fraud alerts on all your accounts," Jennifer informed me after reviewing the evidence I'd emailed. "We're also flagging your credit profile to prevent any new accounts from being opened without verbal confirmation directly from you." What about the mortgage they're trying to get me to co-sign?" "I'll contact the lender immediately and inform them that the co-signer's identity may have been compromised. Most reputable mortgage companies will halt proceedings immediately when fraud is suspected. As I finished my call with the bank, Patricia knocked on the storage room door. "Helena, dear, we really need to get going. The traffic might be heavy today." "Just finishing up," I replied, my voice remarkably calm considering the circumstances. Marcus squeezed my hand supportively. Over the past 2 days, he'd witnessed my transformation from a confused and hurt daughter to someone capable of fighting back against sophisticated criminals. The man I loved had seen me at my most vulnerable and had never once suggested that I simply comply to avoid conflict. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "As ready as I can be," I replied. The next discovery came from an unexpected source. As I gathered my personal belongings to leave the storage room for the final time, I found a letter that had been slipped under the door sometime during the night. The envelope was addressed to me in Emily's handwriting. Inside was a 2-page letter that Emily had apparently written after our phone conversation and somehow managed to have delivered to the house overnight. The letter contained additional information that made our parents' deception even more extensive than I'd realized. "Helena," the letter began, "after talking with you yesterday, I contacted our cousin Jake in Denver. Dad told me that Jake had co-signed a loan for his own parents and that it worked out perfectly. I wanted to get Jake's advice for you about the mortgage situation." My hands trembled as I continued reading. Jake has never co-signed anything for anyone. He said Dad called him 6 months ago asking detailed questions about co-signing procedures, but Jake specifically advised against it and warned Dad about the risks. Dad never mentioned to Jake that he was planning to ask you to co-sign anything. Emily had essentially caught our father in another lie using family members to research co-signing while simultaneously lying about their experiences to make the arrangement seem safer than it actually was. "But here's the really scary part," Emily's letter continued. "Jake said Dad asked him not to mention their conversation to you if you ever brought up financial topics. Dad specifically said the family was planning a financial surprise for you and didn't want the details spoiled." A financial surprise. Gerald had been describing his scheme to defraud me as a surprise gift, positioning his identity theft and manipulation as some kind of family celebration. The final paragraph of Emily's letter provided the confirmation I needed for my decision. "Helena, I've been thinking about this all night. If they're willing to lie to me about money, lie to Jake about you, and lie to you about me, then everything they've told all of us is probably a lie. Please don't sign anything. I'd rather lose the money I already gave them than watch them destroy your life too." As I folded Emily's letter and put it in my purse, Gerald's voice boomed through the house with increasing urgency. "Helena, Patricia, we're going to be late." It was time to go to the mortgage appointment that would change everything. But instead of walking into that office as the confused and manipulated victim my parents expected, I would be entering as someone armed with evidence, legal support, and the absolute certainty that I was making the right choice. The question was no longer whether I had the courage to refuse their demands. The question was whether they would accept my refusal gracefully, or whether this confrontation would reveal even more disturbing aspects of their character. Either way, I was about to find out exactly what kind of people had raised me and what kind of person I had become in response. The mortgage broker's office was located in a sterile business complex 20 minutes from my parents' house. As Gerald pulled into the parking lot, I could see Patricia checking her makeup in the visor mirror, while Trevor and Stephanie followed behind us in their BMW. They decided to come along to witness what they expected to be my final capitulation to family pressure. "Remember, Helena," Patricia said as we walked toward the building. "This is really just a formality. The broker has everything prepared, so we should be done in 30 minutes. The Pinnacle Home Lending Office was exactly what I'd expected. Beige walls, motivational posters about homeownership dreams, and a reception area designed to make people feel comfortable about making the largest financial commitment of their lives. The broker, a middle-aged man named Steve Patterson, greeted us with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who made his living facilitating other people's debt. "The Morrison family," Steve announced with false cheer. "I'm so excited to help you folks today. Helena, your parents have told me wonderful things about your willingness to help the family." I managed a polite smile while taking note of everything in the room. Steve's desk was covered with paperwork that had clearly been prepared in advance. Multiple copies of mortgage documents, disclosure forms, and signature pages were arranged in neat stacks with yellow sticky notes marking the places where I was expected to sign. "Let's get started," Gerald said, settling into a chair beside Steve's desk. "We're all eager to get this wrapped up." But before Steve could begin his presentation, I spoke up with a calm clarity that surprised even me. "Actually, I'd like to speak with Gerald and Patricia privately before we proceed." Steve looked confused. "Oh, is there a problem with the paperwork? I can certainly address any questions you might have." "It's a family matter," I replied firmly. "I need to discuss some concerns with my parents before we move forward." Gerald's confident expression flickered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Helena, sweetheart, we've already discussed everything at home. There's nothing that can't be addressed right here." "I insist," I said, my voice carrying a steel that I'd never used with my parents before. 5 minutes, privately." Patricia exchanged a quick glance with Gerald, and I could see them trying to calculate whether this was normal pre-signing nervousness or something more serious. Trevor and Stephanie looked on with growing concern as the family dynamic shifted in ways they hadn't anticipated. Of course, Patricia finally agreed with forced brightness. "Steve, could we use your conference room for just a moment?" Steve directed us to a small room adjacent to his office, and I waited until the door closed completely before beginning the most important conversation of my life. "I know everything," I said, simply pulling out my phone and displaying the photos I'd taken of Gerald's signature practice sheets. The color drained from Gerald's face as he recognized his own handwriting, but he attempted to maintain his innocent facade. "Helena, I don't understand what you're showing me." "These are your attempts to forge my signature," I continued calmly, "along with copies of my tax returns, credit reports, and bank statements that you stole from my personal files without permission." Patricia's mouth opened and closed silently, but no sound emerged. The confident manipulation tactics they'd used for months were suddenly useless in the face of documented evidence of their crimes. "I also know that you haven't made a mortgage payment in 4 months. I continued watching their expressions crumble as each revelation hit home. "I know about the pre-foreclosure notice you received 2 weeks ago. I know about the $400,000 in total debt you've been hiding from me." "How did you—" Gerald began, then stopped himself. "I know that you've been lying to Emily about the amount of money involved, and that you've already taken $12,000 from her under false pretenses," I said. "I know about the legal judgments against you, the wage garnishments, and the liens on your house." Patricia finally found her voice. "Helena, you don't understand the situation. We're desperate. We could lose everything." "I understand the situation perfectly," I replied. "You're facing foreclosure because of years of financial mismanagement, and you've decided to solve your problems by destroying my financial future." Gerald's facade finally cracked completely. "You ungrateful little bitch," he snarled, his voice filled with a venom I'd never heard before. "After everything we've done for you, everything we've sacrificed, you're going to abandon us when we need you most." The mask was off now. The loving father who had raised me was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The transformation was so complete and so ugly that I felt a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew who I was really dealing with. "Everything you've sacrificed," I repeated incredulously. "Gerald, you've been committing felony fraud using my identity. You've stolen my personal information, forged my signature, and lied to the entire family about your financial situation." "We raised you," Patricia screamed, abandoning all pretense of dignity. We fed you and clothed you and paid for your education. You owe us this." "I owe you gratitude and respect," I replied calmly. "I don't owe you my financial destruction." Gerald stood up abruptly, his face flushed with rage. "If you walk out of here without signing those papers, you're no longer our daughter. Do you understand me? You'll never be welcome in our house again." "And Emily will be cut off too," Patricia added viciously. "If you destroy our family's financial security, both of you will pay the price." The threats that Marcus had overheard were now being delivered directly to my face. But instead of feeling intimidated, I felt a strange sense of liberation. These people were threatening to disown me for refusing to become complicit in their fraud. The choice had never been clearer. "Then I guess we're done here," I said, standing up and moving toward the door. "Helena, wait." Gerald called desperately, his tone shifting from threats back to manipulation. "We can work something out. Maybe a smaller amount. Maybe just 50,000 to help us catch up on payments." "No," I said without turning around. "I'm not co-signing anything, and I'm reporting the identity theft and fraud to the police and my bank." Patricia gasped. "You wouldn't dare call the police on your own parents." "I already have," I replied, opening the conference room door. "Detective Sarah Martinez is expecting my formal statement this afternoon." As I walked back into Steve's office, I could hear Gerald and Patricia whispering frantically behind me. Trevor and Stephanie looked up expectantly, clearly assuming that our private conversation had resolved whatever minor concerns I might have had. "I'm sorry, Mr. Patterson," I announced clearly, my voice carrying through the reception area. "I won't be signing any mortgage documents today. My parents have been using my personal information without permission, and I've reported the fraud to law enforcement." Steve's professional demeanor evaporated instantly. "I'm sorry, what?" "The co-signer application was submitted using stolen personal information," I explained. "I've never agreed to co-sign this mortgage, and my parents have been attempting to forge my signature." Trevor jumped to his feet. "Helena, what the hell are you doing?" "I'm protecting myself from felony fraud," I replied calmly. "Something you might want to consider as well, since you've been planning to accept $20,000 from the proceeds of this illegal loan." Steve was already reaching for his phone. "I need to call our compliance department immediately. If there's been fraud involved in this application, we have to halt all proceedings and report it to the authorities." Patricia burst out of the conference room, her face streaked with tears and makeup. "Helena, please don't do this to us. We're your family." "But family doesn't commit identity theft," I replied, walking toward the exit. "Family doesn't steal from each other, lie to each other, or threaten each other with disownment when their crimes are exposed." As I reached the door, Gerald's voice followed me with one final threat. "You'll regret this, Helena, when we lose the house and have nowhere to go that'll be on your conscience forever." I turned back to look at him one last time. This man who had taught me to ride a bicycle helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation. This man who was now threatening me with guilt and manipulation because I'd refused to let him commit fraud using my identity. "No, Gerald," I said quietly, "your financial problems are the result of your choices, not mine. And losing your daughter is the result of your crimes, not my refusal to become your victim." I walked out of that office knowing that my relationship with my parents was over forever. But for the first time in days, I could breathe freely. The storage room, the altered photographs, the stolen inheritance, and the fraudulent mortgage scheme were all behind me now. The most important battle of my life was just beginning, but I'd already won the war for my financial freedom and self-respect. Marcus was waiting in the parking lot with the engine running when I emerged from the mortgage broker's office. I could see Gerald and Patricia through the glass doors arguing frantically with Steve Patterson, while Trevor and Stephanie stood by, looking confused and increasingly alarmed. "Drive," I said as I got into the car and Marcus pulled away immediately. "How did it go?" he asked, though my expression probably told him everything he needed to know. "Exactly like we expected," I replied, already dialing Emily's number. But it's not over yet. We need to get Emily involved before Gerald and Patricia start spinning this to the rest of the family. Emily answered on the second ring. Helena, what happened at the mortgage appointment? I refused to sign expose their fraud and they threatened to disown both of us, I said quickly. Emily, I need you to call Uncle Robert immediately and ask him to gather the family for an emergency meeting tonight. Tell him it's about serious criminal activity involving Gerald and Patricia. Criminal activity? Emily's voice was shocked but not surprised. After our conversations over the past few days, she'd been preparing for something like this. Identity theft, mortgage fraud, forgery, and systematic financial abuse. I confirmed. I have evidence of everything, and the police are already involved. What do you need me to do? Get everyone together at Uncle Robert's house if possible. I'm going to present all the evidence to the family at once before Gerald and Patricia can spread their version of what happened. Emily's voice was strong and determined. I'll call Uncle Robert right now. Helena, I'm so proud of you for fighting back. While Emily worked on arranging the family meeting, Marcus and I drove to the police station to meet with Detective Martinez. She'd already reviewed the evidence files I'd emailed earlier and had begun preliminary investigations into Gerald and Patricia's financial activities. Ms. Morrison, what you've uncovered represents a sophisticated fraud scheme, Detective Martinez confirmed as we reviewed the evidence in her office. The unauthorized credit inquiries alone constitute identity theft under state law. Combined with the signature forgery attempts and the mortgage fraud, we're looking at multiple felony charges. What happens next? I asked. We'll need to interview the mortgage broker about what transpired today, and we'll be requesting financial records from your parents' bank to verify the scope of their financial problems. Based on what you've shown me, I expect we'll be filing charges within the next week. Will they be arrested? Probably not immediately unless they attempt to flee or commit additional crimes, but they'll be formally charged and they'll need to appear in court. Detective Martinez provided me with official documentation of the fraud report, along with contact information for victim services and financial recovery assistance. As we left the police station, I felt like I was carrying the weight of irrefutable proof that my parents had chosen to be criminals rather than honest people facing financial difficulties. By 6 o'clock that evening, Emily had worked her magic. Uncle Robert's house was filled with extended family members who had responded to his urgent request for an emergency family gathering. The same people who had toasted my supposed generosity at Thanksgiving dinner the night before were now seated in Robert's living room, looking concerned and confused about why they'd been summoned. Gerald and Patricia arrived last, clearly having spent the afternoon trying to figure out how to control the damage from the mortgage office disaster. They looked haggard and defensive, but they were still attempting to maintain their innocent victim facade. Before we begin, Uncle Robert announced from his position near the fireplace, I want everyone to know that Helena has requested this meeting to discuss serious allegations against Gerald and Patricia. Helena, the floor is yours. I stood up in the center of the room, surrounded by people I'd known and loved my entire life. Some of them would probably never forgive me for what I was about to reveal about their brother, their in-law, their friend. But they deserved to know the truth. Yesterday, Gerald and Patricia asked me to co-sign a mortgage refinance for $290,000. I began. Today, I discovered that they've been committing systematic fraud to pressure me into signing that mortgage. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to Uncle Robert's television, displaying the photographs I'd taken of Gerald's signature practice sheets. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs as everyone saw the evidence of attempted forgery. These are pages from Gerald's legal pad showing his attempts to learn to forge my signature, I explained as the images filled the screen. He's been practicing for weeks. Aunt Margaret's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Gerald, please tell me this isn't what it looks like. Gerald remained silent, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. I continued through the evidence, methodically, the stolen financial records, this unauthorized credit checks, the lies about Emily's involvement, the hidden debt, and foreclosure notices. With each revelation, the family's shock and horror grew more pronounced. Emily is joining us by video call to confirm her part of the story. I announced, connecting my laptop to Emily's video call from London. Emily's face appeared on the television screen, and she immediately launched into her account of Gerald's manipulation and the $12,000 she'd been tricked into sending. Several relatives gasped as Emily described how Gerald had lied to her about the loan amount and my supposed selfish refusal to help. "I want everyone to understand," Emily said from London, her voice carrying clearly through Uncle Robert's sound system, "that Helena had no idea I'd been sending money, and I had no idea about the real amount they were asking her to guarantee. They lied to both of us to manipulate us separately." Cousin David spoke up first. "Gerald, is this true? Did you really forge Helena's signature and steal her financial information?" Gerald finally found his voice, but instead of denial or apology, he chose defiance. "Everything I did was for this family. We're facing foreclosure, and Helena was our only option. Sometimes desperate times require desperate measures." Desperate measures. Uncle Robert's retired police officer training was evident in his tone. "Gerald, this is felony fraud. This isn't desperate. This is criminal." Patricia tried a different approach, appealing to the family's sympathy. "We didn't want to burden anyone with our financial problems. We thought if Helena helped us quietly, we could solve everything without worrying the rest of the family." "Aside by committing crimes?" Aunt Carol asked incredulously. "Patricia, how could you think this was acceptable?" I pulled up the final piece of evidence, the pre-foreclosure notice, and the property records showing $400,000 in total debt. "They weren't asking me to help with temporary financial problems," I explained. "They were asking me to guarantee nearly $500,000 in debt with a foreclosure notice that gives them only 6 more weeks to pay or lose the house entirely." The room fell completely silent as the scope of Gerald and Patricia's deception became clear. These weren't proud parents who had encountered unexpected difficulties. These were people who had been living far beyond their means for years and had decided to solve their problems by victimizing their own children. Trevor, who had been quietly horrified throughout the presentation, finally spoke up. "Dad, you told me the house was secure. You said the refinance was just for some minor debt consolidation and our down payment money." "The down payment they promised you was going to come from a fraudulent loan that would have destroyed Helena's credit and financial future," I pointed out. "You would have been accepting stolen money." Stephanie burst into tears. "Trevor, we can't take money from this. This is horrible." But the most powerful moment came when Uncle James, Gerald's younger brother, stood up slowly and looked directly at Gerald with an expression of complete disappointment. "Gerald, I lent you $15,000 last year when you said you were having temporary cash flow problems. You promised to pay me back within 6 months." Gerald's face went white. "James, you never intended to pay me back, did you?" James continued. "You were already planning to use Helena as your solution to everything. How many of us have you been lying to and stealing from?" The room erupted in angry voices as family members began sharing their own stories of Gerald's financial requests and manipulations over the past 2 years. It turned out that he'd borrowed money from at least 5 different relatives, always with promises to repay that had never materialized. "I've heard enough," Uncle Robert announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Gerald, Patricia, what you've done is not just illegal, it's an unconscionable betrayal of family trust. Helena has every right to press charges, and frankly, I think she should." "I already have," I said quietly, and the room fell silent again. "I filed a police report this afternoon. Detective Sarah Martinez is handling the case." Patricia dissolved into hysterical tears while Gerald sat rigid with barely contained fury. but around the room I could see expressions of support and approval from the family members who now understood the full extent of what I'd endured. Helena, Aunt Margaret said softly, "I'm so sorry we didn't see what was happening to you. The way they treated you yesterday, the storage room, all of it makes sense now. They were trying to break down my self-esteem to make me more compliant." I explained. The psychological manipulation was as calculated as the financial fraud. As the family meeting concluded, it was clear that Gerald and Patricia had lost more than just their mortgage scheme. They'd lost the respect and trust of their entire extended family people who now saw them as criminals rather than victims of unfortunate circumstances. But, more importantly, I'd gained something invaluable, a family that finally understood the truth and supported my decision to protect myself. The isolation and humiliation of the past few days had been replaced by validation and solidarity. The battle wasn't over yet, but I was no longer fighting alone. The transformation in family dynamics after the emergency meeting was remarkable and immediate. As people prepared to leave Uncle Robert's house, I found myself surrounded by relatives offering help, support, and apologies for not recognizing what Gerald and Patricia had been doing to me. Uncle Robert approached me first, his retired police officer experience evident in his practical approach to the situation. "Helena, I want you to know that what you did today took tremendous courage. Exposing family members for criminal behavior is one of the hardest things anyone can do." I was terrified, I admitted. I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting or being too harsh. "You weren't," Robert said firmly. "I've seen cases like this before. Financial fraud within families often escalates until someone gets completely destroyed. You stopped it before they could ruin your life." Robert handed me a business card. "This is my friend Detective Coleman, who specializes in family financial crimes. He can help you navigate the legal process and make sure you're protected from any retaliation." Aunt Margaret was next, and her approach was more emotional but equally supportive. "Helena, honey, I feel terrible about last night. When Gerald was praising your generosity at dinner, I should have asked more questions. Something felt off about the whole situation." "How could you have known?" I asked. "They had me convinced it was normal family support." "Because I know you," Margaret replied. "I've watched you grow up, and you've never been reckless with money. The idea that you'd agree to co-sign a massive loan without asking detailed questions should have been a red flag." Margaret pulled out her checkbook. "I want to reimburse you for any costs you've incurred fighting this. Legal fees, credit monitoring services, whatever you need." I tried to decline, but Margaret was insistent. "Helena, half this family has lent Gerald money over the years, thinking we were helping him through temporary difficulties. Now we know he was planning to solve his problems by destroying his daughter's financial future. The least we can do is make sure you don't suffer financially for protecting yourself." The most surprising support came from cousins I'd barely spoken to in years. Cousin Lisa, who lived in California, had driven through the night after Emily called her about the emergency meeting. "Helena, I had to come," Lisa explained. 5 years ago, my ex-husband nearly destroyed my credit through identity theft and financial fraud. I know what you're going through, and I want you to know it gets better." Lisa shared her own experience of discovering fraudulent accounts, fighting credit agencies, and rebuilding her financial reputation. Her advice was practical and specific, covering everything from credit monitoring services to documentation strategies for insurance claims. The most important thing, Lisa emphasized, is that you acted quickly. Some people spend years trying to undo damage from family financial fraud because they're too embarrassed or too loyal to report it immediately. Even Trevor and Stephanie, who had initially seemed shocked and defensive about my accusations, approached me before leaving. "Helena, I owe you an apology," Trevor said, his voice heavy with shame. "I knew Dad was having financial problems, but I didn't ask questions about where the down payment money was coming from. I should have realized something was wrong when they offered us $20,000 out of nowhere." "We're not taking any money from them," Stephanie added firmly. "We'll find our own way to buy a house. I can't believe they were planning to use stolen money for our down payment." Trevor's apology felt genuine, but I could see the broader implications of the situation hitting him as well. "Trevor, you might want to check your own credit reports," I suggested. "If they've been stealing my financial information for months, they might have done the same to you." Trevor's face went pale as he realized the possibility. "Do you think they would have used my information too?" "I don't know, but it's worth checking." Detective Martinez said that people who commit identity theft against one family member often have information on multiple relatives. As the evening wound down, Emily remained connected via video call to coordinate ongoing plans. "Helena, I've been researching international wire transfer fraud, and I think I might be able to recover some of the money I sent them," she announced. "How hush?" I asked. "If I can prove that the money was obtained through false pretenses, my bank might be able to reverse some of the transfers. It's worth trying, especially now that we have evidence of their systematic deception." Emily had also been busy in other ways. "I've contacted the university's legal aid clinic here in London, and they're going to help me document my case. Plus, I've decided to come home for Christmas instead of sending money for travel. I want to be there in person to support you through whatever happens next." The most touching moment came when Marcus's parents called to check on the situation. Marcus had kept them informed about the family drama, and they wanted to offer their support directly. Helena, we want you to know that you have a place with our family for any holiday or family gathering," Marcus's mother said warmly. "What happened to you this week should never happen to anyone, and we're proud of you for standing up for yourself." "Well, we've also talked to our financial planner," Marcus's father added, "and we'd be happy to help you review your credit reports and financial accounts to make sure Gerald and Patricia haven't caused any damage you haven't discovered yet." As Marcus and I finally returned to our hotel room that evening, I felt emotionally drained, but also lighter than I'd felt in months. The isolation and gaslighting that Gerald and Patricia had subjected me to were gone, replaced by a network of people who understood exactly what had happened and supported my decision to fight back. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked as we settled in for the night. "Free," I said without hesitation. "For the first time since I arrived here, I feel free." Marcus smiled and pulled me closer. "You know, seeing you fight back against all that manipulation and fraud has made me fall in love with you all over again. You're stronger than I think you ever knew." "I had help," I pointed out. "If you hadn't recorded their conversations, if Emily hadn't called with warnings, if Uncle Robert hadn't taken my evidence seriously, this could have gone very differently." "But you're the one who chose to fight back instead of giving in," Marcus reminded me. "You're the one who gathered evidence and called the police. You're the one who had the courage to expose them publicly." As I fell asleep that night in a comfortable hotel bed instead of a storage room filled with paint cans, I realized that losing my parents' love and approval had been devastating but necessary. The people who truly cared about me had rallied around me when I needed them most. And for the first time in my adult life, I understood the difference between family loyalty and family manipulation. Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your financial future to prove your devotion. Real family doesn't threaten to disown you for protecting yourself from their crimes. The legal process was just beginning, and I knew there would be difficult months ahead, but I was no longer facing this battle alone. 6 weeks after the confrontation at the mortgage broker's office, the legal consequences of Gerald and Patricia's actions began materializing with the swift efficiency of the justice system when presented with overwhelming evidence. Detective Martinez had worked quickly to build a comprehensive case. The mortgage broker had provided recordings of Gerald's initial application, which included false statements about my agreement to co-sign. The bank had turned over records showing the unauthorized credit inquiries. Most damaging of all, Gerald's own documented signature practice and stolen financial records provided undeniable proof of premeditation. On a cold January morning, I sat in the courthouse watching as Gerald Morrison and Patricia Morrison were formally arraigned on multiple felony charges: identity theft, mortgage fraud, attempted forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Each charge carried potential prison sentences of 2 to 5 years. Uncle Robert had accompanied me to the hearing, providing both moral support and his professional perspective on the legal proceedings. "Helena, I want you to understand how serious this case is," he'd explained on the drive to the courthouse. "The prosecutor isn't treating this as a family dispute or a misunderstanding. These are major financial crimes that could have cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars." Gerald and Patricia's attorney had attempted to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that their actions were motivated by desperation rather than malicious intent. But Assistant District Attorney Rachel Chen had rejected the plea offer, explaining to me that the sophistication and planning involved in their scheme demonstrated clear criminal intent rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. "Ms. Morrison, your parents spent months systematically collecting your personal information and planning this fraud," Ada Chen had told me during our pre-hearing consultation. "This wasn't an impulsive decision made in a moment of financial panic. This was a carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise." The hearing itself was brief but emotionally intense. Gerald and Patricia sat at the defendant's table looking significantly older than they had just 6 weeks earlier. The stress of facing criminal charges had taken a visible toll on both of them, but I felt no satisfaction in seeing them diminished. When the judge asked if they understood the charges against them, Gerald's voice was barely audible as he answered, "Yes, Your Honor." Patricia simply nodded, tears streaming down her face. Their formal sentencing was scheduled for March, pending completion of pre-sentence investigations and financial assessments. But the immediate consequences were already severe. The mortgage company had reported the fraud attempt to industry databases, making it nearly impossible for them to obtain credit anywhere. Their house had gone into foreclosure as expected, with a sale date scheduled for February. The most significant development came from an unexpected source. Emily had successfully recovered $8,000 of the $12,000 she'd sent them through her bank's International Fraud Recovery Program. Her London bank had determined that the wire transfers were obtained through false pretenses and had reversed the transactions, leaving Gerald and Patricia responsible for the debt to the receiving bank. "It's not all the money I lost," Emily explained during our weekly video call, "but it's enough to cover my living expenses until I finish my dissertation. Plus, the bank flagged their account, which prevented them from attempting to manipulate other international relatives." Trevor and Stephanie had discovered their own evidence of Gerald's financial schemes. When Trevor checked his credit report on my recommendation, he found that Gerald had applied for credit cards using Trevor's information 3 times in the past year. Fortunately, all the applications had been denied due to Trevor's limited credit history, but the unauthorized inquiries had damaged his credit score. "I can't believe Dad was planning to destroy both of us financially," Trevor told me during one of our reconciliation conversations. "When I think about how close I came to accepting that down payment money, knowing it came from fraud committed against my own sister, it makes me sick." Trevor and Stephanie had decided to postpone their house purchase indefinitely, choosing instead to rent while they rebuilt their savings through legitimate means. "We want to buy our first home with clean money," Stephanie explained. "Starting our marriage with the proceeds from financial fraud felt like building on a foundation of lies." The broader family consequences were equally significant. Uncle James, who had lent Gerald $15,000 the previous year, had hired an attorney to pursue civil recovery of his money. When other relatives learned about James's legal action, several more family members came forward with their own stories of Gerald's unpaid loans and financial manipulations. It turns out Gerald had been running a family Ponzi scheme for years. Aunt Margaret explained to me he was borrowing money from one relative to make minimum payments on loans from other relatives, all while promising everyone that his financial problems were temporary. The total amount Gerald owed to family members exceeded $60,000, not including the $12,000 he'd taken from Emily. Combined with his credit card debt, mortgage arrears, and various other obligations, his total debt burden was approaching $500,000. Gerald's response to the mounting legal and financial pressure was to declare bankruptcy, a process that would eliminate most of his debts, but would also result in the loss of all remaining assets, including the house that had been in our family for 20 years. Patricia had chosen a different path. She'd entered court-ordered financial counseling and was attempting to negotiate payment plans with creditors to avoid bankruptcy. Her counselor had recommended that she find employment for the first time in 15 years to demonstrate her commitment to financial responsibility. "Your mother got a job at a local retail store," Uncle Robert informed me during one of our regular check-in calls. "Minimum wage, part-time hours, but it's a start. Her counselor says that taking responsibility for her actions is the first step toward rehabilitation." The criminal case had also attracted attention from financial fraud investigators, who discovered that Gerald had been operating under multiple Social Security numbers and had credit accounts dating back decades that he'd never disclosed to Patricia. The scope of his financial deception extended far beyond what even Patricia had known about. Detective Martinez called me in February with an update that was both shocking and validating. "Helena, we've discovered evidence that Gerald has been planning financial fraud schemes for over 3 years. You weren't his first target, just his most recent one." "What do you mean?" I asked. "He attempted similar identity theft with a former neighbor who refused to lend him money in 2021. He also tried to use your sister Emily's information to apply for credit cards in 2022, but the applications were flagged because she was living overseas." The revelation that I'd been part of a pattern of criminal behavior rather than the victim of a desperate one-time scheme was both horrifying and reassuring. It confirmed that my decision to fight back had been absolutely necessary and that Gerald's actions represented his true character, rather than an aberrant response to financial stress. As winter turned toward spring, the final legal pieces fell into place. Gerald accepted a plea deal that would result in 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and mandatory financial counseling. Patricia received a sentence of community service and probation contingent on her maintaining steady employment and making restitution payments. But perhaps the most meaningful consequence was the complete transformation of my relationship with my extended family. The relatives who had initially been shocked by my accusations against Gerald and Patricia now regularly checked in to make sure I was recovering from the trauma of financial fraud. "Helena, what you went through was a form of family abuse that most people don't understand," Aunt Carol told me during Easter dinner at Uncle Robert's house. "You were systematically manipulated and exploited by people who were supposed to protect you. The fact that you recognized what was happening and fought back probably saved your entire financial future." As I reflected on the 6 months that had passed since that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I realized that the criminal justice system had provided more than just legal resolution. It had given me official validation that Gerald and Patricia's treatment of me had been genuinely criminal, not just unfortunate family dynamics or generational misunderstandings. The storage room, the altered photographs, the stolen inheritance, and the fraudulent mortgage scheme hadn't been acceptable family behavior that I'd overreacted to. They'd been crimes committed against me by people who had chosen to victimize their own daughter rather than face the consequences of their financial irresponsibility. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I'd learned to distinguish between family loyalty and family exploitation. Real love doesn't require criminal behavior to prove its worth. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my own apartment, preparing Thanksgiving dinner for the family I'd chosen, rather than the family I'd been born into. The contrast with the previous year couldn't have been more striking. Instead of a storage room filled with paint cans and broken dreams, I was in a space that truly belonged to me, surrounded by people who valued my presence rather than my potential utility. Marcus was in the living room setting up folding chairs borrowed from Uncle Robert, who would be joining us, along with Aunt Carol and their youngest son, Michael. Emily had flown in from London the day before, having completed her PhD dissertation and accepted a position with an international consulting firm based in New York. Trevor and Stephanie were bringing dessert, having spent the past year rebuilding their relationship with me through honest communication and genuine respect. The most significant change was visible on my left hand, an engagement ring that Marcus had presented to me 6 months earlier during a quiet dinner at our favorite restaurant. His proposal had been simple and heartfelt, acknowledging the strength I'd shown during the darkest period of my life. Helena, watching you fight for your integrity and your future made me realize that I want to spend my life with someone who has the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. He'd said, "Will you marry me?" I'd said yes immediately, not just because I loved him, but because he'd proven himself to be the kind of partner who would stand beside me during crises, rather than expecting me to sacrifice my well-being for his comfort. Emily had been my first call after accepting Marcus's proposal, and her reaction had been pure joy. "Helena, you deserve someone who sees your strength instead of your vulnerabilities," she'd said from London. "Marcus proved himself when he stood up to fraud instead of encouraging you to keep the peace." The legal aftermath of Gerald and Patricia's criminal charges had concluded 8 months earlier. Gerald had served 14 months in minimum security prison before being released to a halfway house for the remainder of his sentence. Patricia had completed her community service requirements and maintained steady employment, though she remained on probation for another year. More importantly, both of them had entered counseling programs that addressed the psychological patterns underlying their criminal behavior. Gerald's counselor had identified narcissistic personality traits that made him feel entitled to other people's resources when facing personal difficulties. Patricia's counselor had worked with her on codependent behaviors that led her to enable Gerald's crimes, rather than confronting his financial irresponsibility. Your parents are learning that their relationship was built on mutual dysfunction rather than genuine love, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the family therapist I'd been seeing, explained during one of our sessions. Gerald used manipulation and financial schemes to avoid responsibility, while Patricia used denial and enabling behaviors to avoid conflict. The most unexpected development had been Patricia's request to meet with me for a supervised conversation at Dr. Walsh's office 3 months earlier. I'd been hesitant to agree, but Emily and Marcus had both encouraged me to hear what she had to say. "Helena, I need you to know that I understand now that what we did to you was criminal and abusive," Patricia had said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I spent months blaming you for destroying our family by calling the police, but my counselor helped me realize that Gerald and I destroyed our family by choosing to commit crimes against our own daughter." The conversation had been difficult, but ultimately healing. Patricia had taken full responsibility for her role in the fraud scheme and had acknowledged the systematic psychological manipulation they'd used to make me compliant. The storage room, the altered photographs, giving away your grandmother's jewelry, all of it was designed to make you feel insecure about your place in our family, she'd admitted. "We used your love for us as a weapon against you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Patricia had also provided information that helped me understand the full scope of their financial deception. Gerald had been living beyond their means for over 5 years, using credit cards and family loans to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford, while hiding the true extent of their debt from everyone, including Patricia herself. I thought we were having temporary cash flow problems, she'd explained. I didn't know about the multiple mortgages, the liens on the house, or the extent of Gerald's borrowing from family members. When I found out how much money we really owed, I realized that asking you to co-sign wasn't just wrong, it was cruel. The most meaningful part of our conversation had been Patricia's acknowledgement of the broader pattern of emotional manipulation I'd endured throughout my childhood. You were always the responsible one, the one who tried to keep everyone happy and avoid conflict, she'd said. Gerald and I took advantage of that instead of protecting it. We taught you that your value in this family was conditional on your willingness to sacrifice for everyone else's benefit. I'd left that therapy session with a sense of closure I hadn't expected to achieve. Patricia's apologies couldn't undo the damage they'd caused, but her genuine understanding of their crimes had allowed me to forgive her without requiring ongoing relationship. Gerald had remained more resistant to accepting responsibility, but his prison counselor had reported progress in helping him understand the impact of his actions on others. He'd written me a letter from prison acknowledging his crimes and expressing hope that someday I might be able to forgive him. I'd chosen not to respond to Gerald's letter, but I'd kept it as a reminder of how far our family had traveled from the dysfunction of financial abuse to the possibility of genuine accountability. The financial consequences had been severe for Gerald and Patricia, but liberating for me. They'd lost their house to foreclosure, declared bankruptcy, and were now living in a small rental apartment, while Patricia worked 2 part-time jobs to cover their basic expenses. Meanwhile, my credit had been fully restored, my savings had grown substantially due to careful financial management, and I'd been able to purchase my own apartment without co-signers or family assistance. Emily had thrived as well, using her recovery of the stolen money to complete her education and launching a successful career in international business development. What Gerald and Patricia taught me, she'd said, is that financial independence isn't just about money, it's about freedom from manipulation. Trevor and Stephanie had found their own path to homeownership through hard work and saving, purchasing a modest starter home that they could afford on their own incomes. Trevor had thanked me multiple times for preventing him from accepting the fraudulent down payment money. Building our life on clean money feels so much better than starting with stolen funds, he'd told me. You saved my integrity as well as your own financial future. As I pulled the turkey from the oven and checked on the side dishes, I reflected on how completely my definition of family had evolved over the past year. Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol had become surrogate parents who offered guidance without manipulation. Emily had transformed from a distant sister into my closest confidant and ally. Trevor and Stephanie had earned their way back into my life through consistent honesty and respect. Most importantly, Marcus's family had welcomed me with unconditional acceptance that had healed wounds I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. His parents had shown me what healthy family dynamics look like: support without strings attached, love without conditions, and respect for individual autonomy. "Helena," Marcus called from the living room, "your lawyer's on the phone. She says it's about the civil restitution case." I'd filed civil lawsuits against both Gerald and Patricia to recover the costs of credit monitoring, legal fees, and financial counseling services related to their fraud. The lawsuits weren't about money as much as they were about establishing clear accountability for the consequences of their crimes. "Ms. Morrison," my attorney Sarah Chen explained, "we've reached a settlement agreement. Patricia has agreed to monthly restitution payments of $200 for the next 3 years, and Gerald will begin payments once he completes his probation and finds steady employment. The settlement wouldn't fully compensate me for the emotional trauma or the time I'd lost dealing with their criminal behavior, but it represented official acknowledgement that their actions had caused measurable harm that required remediation." As guests began arriving for dinner, I watched Emily and Marcus coordinate serving duties, while Uncle Robert shared stories with Trevor about his police career. The conversation was warm, genuine, and completely free of the undercurrents of manipulation that had characterized my family interactions for years. Hi, Helena. This is the most relaxed I've ever seen you during a family gathering, Aunt Carol observed as she helped arrange flowers on the dining table. That's because everyone here actually wants to be here, I replied. There's no hidden agenda, no financial schemes, no psychological manipulation, just people who care about each other. During dinner, Marcus stood to offer a toast that captured the essence of what we'd all learned over the past year. To Helena, for showing all of us that family loyalty sometimes means protecting yourself from family members who would harm you. To Emily, for proving that distance doesn't diminish true sisterly support. To Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol for demonstrating what unconditional family love actually looks like. And to Trevor and Stephanie for showing that relationships can be rebuilt on foundations of honesty and respect. As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The storage room experience had been devastating, but it had also been transformative. It had forced me to distinguish between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and family exploitation, between keeping the peace and protecting my integrity. I have an announcement, I said, standing to address the table. Marcus and I have decided to start a nonprofit organization to help other victims of family financial fraud. We want to provide resources, support, and education to people who are being victimized by relatives using emotional manipulation to commit financial crimes. The idea had grown out of my own experience and my research into how common family financial fraud actually was. Dr. Walsh had explained that financial abuse within families often went unreported because victims felt too guilty or ashamed to pursue legal action against their own relatives. We're calling it the Family Financial Integrity Foundation, Marcus added. Helena's experience taught us that there are probably thousands of people out there being manipulated by family members who use love as a weapon for financial gain. Emily immediately volunteered to help with international outreach, having encountered similar issues during her research into economic fraud in developing countries. Uncle Robert offered to assist with law enforcement education, helping police officers recognize the signs of family financial fraud. As dinner concluded and we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I realized that the storage room experience had ultimately led me to something I never could have imagined, a sense of purpose that grew directly out of my own victimization and recovery. The people around me that evening represented everything I'd learned about healthy relationships, mutual respect, honest communication and support without strings attached, and love that strengthened rather than diminished individual autonomy. Gerald and Patricia had tried to teach me that family loyalty required self-sacrifice and submission to manipulation. Instead, I'd learned that real family loyalty sometimes means protecting yourself and others from family members who would cause harm. The pearl necklace that had once belonged to my grandmother was gone forever, given to someone who had no connection to our family's history. But I'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that my worth wasn't determined by my willingness to be exploited, and that love doesn't require criminal behavior to prove its validity. As Marcus and I cleaned up after our guest had departed, he pulled me close and whispered, "Are you happy with how this all turned out?" "I'm grateful," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I'm grateful for the pain that taught me to recognize manipulation. I'm grateful for the crisis that showed me who my real family is. And I'm grateful for the strength I discovered when I finally decided to fight back." The storage room had been intended to break my spirit and make me compliant. Instead, it had awakened a determination I never knew I possessed. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you. And sometimes losing the family you were born into helps you find the family you were meant to have. Life lesson. True family is built on mutual respect, honest communication, and unconditional support. When someone claims to love you, but consistently manipulates exploits or harms you, they're demonstrating possession rather than love. Real love empowers you to become your best self. It doesn't require you to sacrifice your integrity, your future, or your well-being to prove your devotion. Sometimes protecting yourself from harmful people, even family members, is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They protect the space where genuine love can grow. Thank you so much for joining me on Helena's journey from manipulation to empowerment. Her story reminds us that standing up for ourselves isn't selfish, it's necessary. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If Helena's courage inspired you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by their willingness to be exploited. Remember, you deserve relationships that lift you up, not tear you down. Until next time, choose your own well-being and surround yourself with people who celebrate your strength rather than exploit your kindness.